Hello, and welcome to another episode of the House of Saint Rainey podcast, an awakening podcast. In this episode, we are going to be talking about a very critical perspective to have living this human experience on the intentional, conscious spiritual journey. Before we dive in, I just want to give a quick shout out to my sponsor, which is my book, Finding God, Losing God, Becoming God. I'm a full-time independent author, dedicated my entire life to sharing and encouraging as many people as possible towards unconditional love through unity consciousness. This book is all about discovering this transformative truth of God outside of religion, outside of ego consciousness, and discovering God through observation, intuition, and contemplation. So if you haven't picked it up, make sure to do that. It's going to really help you on your journey. All right, let's dive into this. So a critical perspective to have on the spiritual journey is to have the awareness of the absolute truth while remaining grounded in the relative experience. Aware of the absolute truth, grounded in the relative experience. All right, let's unpack that. That perspective right there is massively important to living your optimal life, to living the most heavenly, pleasant life that is conducive to a positive spiritual expansion, intentional spiritual expansion. We're all having a spiritual experience. We're all spirit having a spiritual experience. And we're all always evolving. We're all always positively evolving in our soul's journey, which is an evolution of individual consciousness. Through these, we just talked about this in a previous episode, through these varying levels of consciousness that are shame, guilt, grief, fear, apathy, desire, and evolving towards courage, neutrality, willingness, acceptance, all the way up to love, joy, peace, and enlightenment. We're all on that journey. But if you want to make the most of your present human incarnation, then this mindset is going to serve you greatly. So let's first discuss awareness of the absolute truth. So the absolute truth, as we have mentioned in previous episodes, is that all is one. Oneness is the absolute truth. It must be the absolute truth. The supreme being, don't think external God, think supreme oneness, think unified consciousness. This is the absolute truth, and it must be. As we observe life, it must come from somewhere. That life source must be outside of time and space, which is to be eternal, must be maximally powerful. This is supreme being. Supreme being is maximum love, is maximum power, omniscience, omnipresence. It is absolute, it is whole, it's complete, it's one. Can't be subtracted from, can't be added to, etc. This is the absolute truth. You are an individual expression of that. The awareness of this truth and of yourself being an individual expression of the one, individual expression of spirit, this gives you the non-dualistic perspective. There's so many benefits to having the non-dualistic perspective. It's almost kind of hard to begin, like, where do you even begin to discuss the benefits of having a non-dualistic perspective? But for starters, it allows you to transcend the human experience, transcend the pendulum of the human experience, which means anything that would formerly threaten your peace, you are now above that. What I mean by that is your perspective. You see it differently now. So if you've been searching in the spiritual journey here, you've probably heard that like we're in like a video game or a matrix or whatever. Let's take the video game analogy. The dualistic perspective is basically the identification with your worldly sense of self. That is the video game character. Now you're here with a purpose, and we're playing this video game. It's very significant. It's very important. It's not, just because it's a video game doesn't mean it's insignificant. But the dualistic perspective in the video game, it's as if you believe yourself to be the totality of self, that you are the video game character when that's not the totality of who you are. But there's no judgment in that because you're meant to believe you're the video game character on a self-realizing journey to realize, oh, I'm actually the one playing the game. Ultimately, I'm the one who programmed the game. To have the dualistic perspective in the video game is anyone that comes to attack you, you feel threatened, your ego, you defend, you attack. You might get hurt, and that you might absorb, the fear, shame, pride, anger, all these sorts of things. That's an attachment to the ego sense of self. To hold the dualistic perspective, the video game character perspective, is a very chaotic way to live. Because you can experience good times, but you'll also experience a lot of frustration, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. And it's like you're in the game and you feel like the game is true reality. And anyone that comes to attack you, man, you're gonna be battered around. It's very chaotic way. Now you might like save the princess or find your prince, in the video game, and that's very enjoyable and it's very good and sweet and it's lovely. But also you're going to be subject to any of the pains that come from within the game. Transcending the video game character perspective into the one that's playing the game. Now that is powerful. When you do that, now you're still in the human experience, right? So I'm still in the human experience. I'm still John Rainey with the non-dualistic perspective, but having that perspective as I continue this human experience is highly powerful, because now anything that comes to attack me in the video game, in the human experience, and I'm not I'm not saying that I've mastered the non-dualistic perspective. I still get frustrated from time to time. I'm a human just like you, but really I'm an individual expression of spirit just like you, and that is oneness. But anytime in this life when the John Rainey, the human experience, when I get in that perspective, I can get frustrated. But when you have the non-dualistic awareness, even if you give into the human experience, maybe for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, then you can come back home. You can come back to self. You can find a moment to process what triggered you, what was so intense that your ego needed to take control. And now you process and you work through it, you articulate, and then you come back home to spirit. You work your way back to spirit alignment with that non-dualistic perspective. And then you learn the lesson from why the ego took over, okay? These are some of the differences between a dualistic and non-dualistic perspective. I want to give another example. Compassion is a really interesting way to perceive the difference between a dualistic and non-dualistic perspective. So the dualistic perspective is when you see other people that are going through pain and suffering, for example, when you see that from a human perspective, especially when you're connected to your heart on the spiritual journey, and when you have the non-dualistic awareness, but you see others going through pain, there's two ways to look at this. From the human perspective, that's compassion. Wow, that is so hard for them to go through, and I feel that, and I want to support them. I want to help them. That's a dualistic perspective. Now, if you take the non-dualistic perspective on someone else's pain or suffering, you understand everything happens as it is meant to happen. We are here on this journey, and pain is our greatest teacher. When you endure something incredibly painful, from the non-dualistic perspective, that is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for growth. That pain could be the exact thing to produce higher realization, higher awakening. If you feel that pain deeply and process it, and you work your way towards spirit alignment, and you're able to see that pain from the non-dualistic perspective, from the individual expression of spirit perspective, then you learn lessons, then you expand your awareness. This just happened to me a couple nights ago. A couple nights ago, I was feeling very discouraged. I was feeling very low. And for about 30 minutes, I just fully expressed my feelings. So this was and I was fully aware. I even said, this was a voice recording. For 30 minutes, I was just like expressing discouragement, fears and doubts and all of these sorts of things. And I even said, this is such a dualistic rant, but I have to speak my truth, which is really important. You have to speak your truth, articulate your truth. And I did that for 30 minutes. And then for the next hour and a half, I was able to transcend that. And as a result, the 30 minutes was incredibly painful. It was like, I was just like in this low moment of despair, which is really rare for me now. I'm not trying to like boast or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, when you're on this path of intentional spiritual growth, your baseline gets better and better, like it gets higher and higher, like towards a greater realization of love more consistently. So experiencing discouragement and despair becomes far less frequent. That's my personal experience. But the other night, I went there. I went there for about 30 minutes. As I transcended that from the non-dualistic perspective, okay, now let's process those feelings and why I'm not feeling supported, why I'm feeling discouraged. As a result of that 2 hours, 30 minutes of like pain and 1.5 hours of like just processing it, at the result of that, I had a massive awakening experience that taught me that the universe is always supporting and guiding me, which is a spiritual truth that a lot of spiritual teachers will teach you, but it's something that I learned and I was confirmed for myself, like very clearly, very distinctly for myself. So that's the difference, right? That's the difference between like there's a dualistic perspective, there's a non-dualistic perspective. There's like the human perspective, there's the spirit perspective. On the spiritual journey, when you reach the awareness of non-duality, that we're all spirit, you gain that perspective. This is the absolute truth that is so important. It's so helpful to navigate through life. Because anytime ego does take over, anytime a challenge takes over, instead of being utterly consumed by it and crushed by it, you understand how to heal. You understand how to articulate those negative feelings. You process them. And as you transcend back home to the spiritual perspective, to the non-dualistic perspective, to the absolute truth, awareness of the absolute truth, you learn lessons and you just grow. You've expanded. It's quite a miraculous journey that we're on. And the non-dualistic perspective just allows so much freedom, so much liberation. So it's like the tool that allows you to transcend the human experience, the pain and suffering of the human experience. Ultimately, what I'm encouraging you with is, in the human experience, it's really important to maintain that awareness. As long as you have the awareness that I am a physical embodiment of love, and so is everyone else, you are free. You are liberated. You are released from judgment, and it's incredibly powerful. And you'll experience for yourself the power of having the spiritual perspective in your own way, in your own unique ways, as I just gave a couple examples. So maintain awareness of the absolute truth that we are all one, that we're all spirit, but now remain grounded in the relative experience. So let's talk about that now. Your relative experience is your lower self experience. That's your human name, your roles, your responsibilities, your gifts, passions, abilities. It's the everyday occurrences. That is the human experience. When you expand your awareness to non-duality, but you're still in the human experience, this shouldn't cause apathy. Apathy is a lower level of consciousness. So this should not inspire apathy. You shouldn't, in the awareness that we're all God having a temporary illusory experience, it shouldn't produce apathy, because that's a lower level of consciousness. And also you realize that you're here for a purpose. You have a purpose. And I can discuss more on personal purpose later, but briefly, I see purpose as twofold. One is a spiritual maturing. It's your soul's journey. It's your evolution of consciousness. And also there's like the calling, what you're here to do. It's discovering what you're here to do that align it most succinctly, as Joseph Campbell says, it's following your bliss. But I take it one step further than that. I love Joseph Campbell. I'm not trying to like add on to, well, I guess I am adding on. I think your calling is serving others by following your bliss. What are your gifts, passions, and abilities? And how can you serve others with your gifts, passions, and abilities? That's what I view as your calling. So your relative experience. Remain grounded in your relative experience. So in your human experience, you practice merging your lower self conscious awareness with your higher self awareness through meditation and contemplation and visualization. Give yourself time and space. Sit in passionate stillness, practice presence. These are ways that you can spend time in flow state. Create something. Follow your bliss. When you do that, you're spending time in infinite intelligence. You're downloading infinite intelligence when you do this. So spiritual maturity, this is, it's pinpointing different ego triggers. If you do get frustrated, sometimes it's just like a small little thing, and maybe it's nothing to put significant time and energy into. But other times there's radical energy shifts where maybe there's a confrontation and you need to resolve the conflict, but then you need to also reflect on, wow, okay, that was a major ego trigger. Why was that so triggering for my ego? This is personal, individual, spiritual journey stuff. When your ego gets triggered, then you evaluate, you process, why did I get so angry? Why do I feel so upset? Why do I feel so insignificant? Why do I not feel loved? That's all dualistic ego stuff, right? It's important, it's significant, but it is that. So then you process it, you speak truth into a lie or whatever you have to do. We'll talk about healing in a later episode. You learn your lesson and you continue evolving. And the next time something comes to trigger your ego with that same thing, you've already resolved it. You've already healed from it. You can say, ego is not welcome here today. I've already spoken truth into that lie. And you affirm that and you continue on in spirit. This is the spiritual maturity process. And then there's taking the next logical step towards your calling. What do you love to do? How can you serve others by doing what you love to do? Also being grounded in the relative experience. Are you married? Do you have children? What does your community look like? You're here to support them in their own journey. From the dualistic perspective, to have compassion, to empower others equally. From the non-dualistic perspective, you know, everything's happening as it's meant to, and all the pain and suffering is really catalyst for others to grow. So you see that, but also from the human perspective, compassion, support, serving others, empowering others. This is to be grounded in the relative experience. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. Maintain the awareness that we are all spirit, having an individual experience, that we are all physically embodying love, joy, and peace. Maintain that awareness that unity is the truth, the ultimate truth. It is the pathway to harmony here on earth. This is all spiritual perspective, non-dualistic perspective stuff. But in your everyday life, you know, this shouldn't promote apathy. If anything, you should be like empowered, energetically empowered to like, how do I evolve in my levels of consciousness? How do I expand? How do I grow? And how can I serve others while doing what I love to do, while I'm here pursuing my bliss, but my bliss is my service to others. That's what I'm doing. That's what this is right now. My bliss, I believe that my calling is to positively encourage as many people as humanly possible towards unconditional love. And I do that through my bliss, which is writing and teaching truths of unconditional love, of unity consciousness, the truth of Jesus, from the Christ consciousness perspective, etc. Really simmer with this life perspective. You maintain that awareness of absolute truth while you remain grounded in the relative experience. That's how I live my life. And sometimes I take the lower self awareness. Sometimes I take that dualistic perspective, like I mentioned earlier. I don't judge myself for that. It's what I'm here to do. And if I have those feelings, that means that there's something unresolved there that I need to process and I need to heal and I need to transcend. And when I do that, gratitude, because now I learned a lesson and now I've evolved. So I'm married. I am here to be the best support to my wife as possible. I am here to be the best father to my son as possible. That's grounded. That's still grounded in this human experience. But all the while, I do my best to maintain that non-dualistic perspective that we are all spirit. I can't control anyone else. Everyone has their own free will. I can't control anyone's free will. I can't control anyone else's I am energy. That's on them. That's for them. All I can do is control my own free will, my own energy. This perspective has completely changed my life. It's allowed me to slowly and gradually raise my baseline experience towards a greater realization of consistent love, joy, and peace, and a sense of unity with everyone. I hope that this perspective helps you and serves you in some way. If this podcast is helpful for you, I would really appreciate a 5-star review. If you haven't grabbed my book, this goes way deeper into these topics, and I literally wrote this book to help humanity. Honestly, just awaken a new capacity for unconditional love, but it has all the truth to awaken oneness. So if you haven't read this, I would really encourage you to get it. I think it'll be really helpful for you. And if you have read it, again, leaving a 5-star review or sharing it with others is such a huge support, because I'm, independent author doing this thing, and I'm trying to serve humanity and also pay the bills. I'm trying to put food on the table. So I have to make these little sales pitches. But I love you so much, and I feel such a camaraderie with you. I really, truly do. As we are all just on this journey together. And I want to assist you on your journey, but it's important for you to know that it's your journey. And while we can be educated, we can be inspired, we can be encouraged by others, you are the one who can save you. It's releasing that worldly sense of self. It's releasing yourself from the video game to understand that you're playing the game, and ultimately the programmer of the game as well. So having this perspective, massively important. I hope that it serves you. Peace and blessings. I'll see you next week on the House of St. Rainey podcast.